Call the February 6th DRB meeting to order. First is agenda changes. I believe we have one.
Yes, I wasn't expecting Mr. Sherman to be here, and I was going to do a presentation for him, but since he's here and he has to go back to work, I'd like to be able to move agenda item number 6 in front of, to become agenda item number 3 before Willett and Campbell.
Okay. All right, if all the board members can review the minutes of January 16th.
I wasn't here, but those minutes looked great.
I second. I'll make a motion to accept as written.
We have a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain.
Abstain.
Okay. You're for?
All right.
So you're gonna do the presentation, Mitt?
Yeah, I'm just going to do it. It's a transfer of land. The story here is you had a few different properties. I know this map is a little hard to see. You have a property that's here, a property here, a property up. Actually, wait a second. I've got the pointer here that's working, so let's use it. You've got a property here, you've got another property here, and this other property. And the Sherman family knew that there was some land in between that they had talked about, but they weren't sure. They did some preliminary research and eventually had to actually hire a surveyor to actually go out and find exactly where this property here, which is in the middle of all these other properties, happens to be located. And it also, this survey kind of rectified and found out where certain property lines were, which they were not quite aware of. But what they're requesting to do here is that there is this existing undeveloped property. It has the access to these particular two properties. And what they would like to do is do a transfer of land that will move this portion of the property to this is one of the Hayden's, Arnold Hayden's property, and move this particular portion of that property to Mr. Sherman's property, the applicant. So it's a transfer of land. It's not creating any nonconformities in what will actually end up being, and but it needs to be a transfer of land since. As opposed to boundary adjustment, since they're changing the property here by more than 20%, in essence by 100%, by eliminating the property altogether. Now, the zoning administrator will basically have two choices. She could do a transfer of land, taking this entire thing and moving it to here, and then do a boundary adjustment here to there, or can do two simultaneous transfer of lands. The other issue that would be involved here is that this land cannot be developed with any structures without coming back to the board for a subdivision. But this area over here, I believe, has a wetland area, and this area over here is pretty much access for the lot, so it's not something that would be generally developed.
So are there 3 different owners?
There's an owner here. This is actually owned by the same person here, but it's 2 separate properties. You have here Mr. Sherman's lot, and then you have this is Darrell Hayden's.
So
property.
Who currently owns the number 1 shaped?
This one here is actually owned by a combination of people. The owner of this property, the owner of, or I should say, the resident on this property, and I believe Mr. Sherman, you own part of that as well.
Well, I own the back half, it's way up on the top, I own the back half up there.
Right, but actually this particular existing property, it's a corporation name that's under a few of the Haydens, and this is...
So that corporation then disappears?
Exactly. And the person who runs the corporation is Arnold Hayden, and he's the one who signed the application on behalf of that corporation.
I don't see a problem with it. In principle, I I think it's not our purview to decide that all the proper deeds and owners deal with the transfers properly, right?
Absolutely, that's a condition with any of these transfer of
Okay.
lands. Yes, they will have to file deeds. They don't necessarily have to file the survey. It may be a good idea in this case here, not something that you necessarily have to require, but it does clarify a lot of the issues that they have.
Also, I noticed it's a 25-foot right-of-way. Aren't we normally do 50-foot right-of-ways?
It's a pre-existing condition. It's been, this 25-foot wide right-of-way exists through this entire property and acts, to help out both of these. In essence, the right-of-way would continue, although this part here would discontinue for the back property here, Mr. Sherman's property, and of course the right-of-way for this would become non-existent because it'd be part of this property.
So property to the north, if that's north,
Right.
what are the chances that further development happens on that private right-of-way to properties north, or are there other access points to properties north?
I don't think that.
My property?
Yeah. How large is your property again? Do you know?
No, my property's, it's what, 500 feet on the back side, in which we have a stone wall, and we have a pole line which goes through there, and there's no development I think could happen back in there besides myself.
And even if that was the case, then
Right away wouldn't be wide.
you'd have to come back for they'd have to come back for a subdivision, and then that could be developed there. But I think the property is, I'm trying to
So
remember.
if it's a potential, what's the issue with just doing a 50-foot right-of-way now and being done with it?
Well, the existing right-of-way is already deeded. I mean, I guess they could increase the size of that if they agreed, both landowners agreed.
Right, but both landowners are not here to agree on that tonight, so that would have to be something different.
Yeah.
Just want to look at one particular thing. This property here, yeah, that's what I thought. It will end up being, these properties are too small to be subdivided. So this would not be,
Well, I didn't know if like the property to the north of that one, if that was like, if this lane would be like the only viable access point to properties if landowners wanted to develop and they wanted to request right away, but.
yeah,
The
the
property
thing,
behind me has its own driveway,
Yeah.
which is off of North Road. It has its own driveway, which comes off of North Road and goes up to them properties behind me.
Okay, those look like pretty small properties anyway.
yeah,
Yes.
and
Okay.
these properties here are not subdividable.
Yep.
So there isn't another,
The drives to the north, the two houses that you see just where the ortho's cut off, there's access to the north for those two.
Okay, all right,
Right.
thank you.
And it's 5
Any
acres.
other board members have any questions?
you could actually approve this on a motion if you'd like.
Anybody here from the public?
And so basically, if you wanted to make a motion, you're basically making a motion that this transfer of land does not constitute a subdivision, and you can refer it to the zoning administrator for permitting.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
go for it. Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, up next is Sherry Willett and Deborah Campbell. Final plat for 2-lot subdivision. We've continued this from October 17th and November 7th, I think. And again on December 19th. Over concerns of the state-approved wastewater and potable water supply. You're up.
Ronald Rose, representing Willett and Campbell, who are in Florida. There's two issues, not just the wastewater. Wastewater permit was issued as depicted on that on the screen, and the concern of the neighbors to the north was in close proximity to their well, and but the state of Vermont has taken that all into consideration and granted a wastewater permit for that lot with a septic system as depicted. Now, at the last meeting, I met offline with the neighbors to the north. I said there's a possibility of moving that, but there's cost. That has no effect here. We amend a permit, take it to another location on that lot. There's a little bit of our time and state of Vermont fees. And we left it that they were going to negotiate something with Campbell and Willett on the cost. I wasn't involved in negotiating any figure. They know what the number is. So that's that. It's permitted. The other issue was amending the stormwater permit for the Mead Farm Road Association. After looking at this closely and running it by the Green Mountain Engineering, who was going to amend the permit if necessary, down in the lower right hand corner of that sketch you'll see the impervious areas that's created by any future development of lot 2. House site, driveway, sidewalk, and turnaround. The total area is 3,400 square feet. Even if the driveway was widened out to 14, 16 feet, you're only going to increase that number by about 1,000 feet, 1,000 square feet. So you're still well under your 5,000 ceiling.
I think you might want to explain what that 5,000.
Excuse me?
You might want to just explain what the 5,000 happens to be.
As I understand, that's Hinesburg rule because the state says an acre. But I think
Actually, no.
Hinesburg is 10.
Actually, I'll help you with this one here. Basically, if you have an existing state stormwater permit, if you're adding on a one-time basis 5,000 square feet, well, less than 5,000 square feet, you don't need to amend a state stormwater permit.
Right.
And that's actually state rules, that's not Hinesburg.
so. What we did was with that table there, break down the various areas that are going to be impervious area. That doesn't include the septic system because that's not an impervious area. Hopefully, that leaches into the field, into the ground. But you do have the proposed drive, house site, walkway, turnaround, things of that nature that creates that 3,400 square feet of impervious area. So we're under that 5,000 square foot. So with that said, the stormwater permit for the Mead Farm Road Association does not have to be amended.
Okay.
So I think part of the concern, at least mine, was the curtain drain that is proposed to protect the mound, but it's directed toward the ditch that would be part of the Mead Farm Road stormwater. Yeah, and how much water was that was going to be injecting into that? So, I mean, I'm guessing the other stuff, talking about the impervious surface, is like what could be running off of the road into the stormwater, and that's what they're trying to protect there. But you've also got this curtain drain that's adding volume, and it was unclear to me at any rate what sort of volume we were expecting to come off of that hillside into the curtain drain and then into the ditch.
I can't answer that, but the curtain drain that we have on the easterly side of that mound system can be tilted and drained to the south and around it and underneath the driveway out into that field too.
Okay, and if we put that
That
in,
minimizes the impact on Mead Farm Road at that point.
so if we do an approval and we put that in the approval, suggesting that it be redirected to the south, that would be a
We can
fine.
do that.
Okay.
Right now, as it is, it's permitted by the state. So we can ensure, we're the ones who are going to end up staking out that system. And when we work with the contractor, when that happens, we can ensure that that curtain drain is tilted to the south.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I don't understand that. That curtain drain, That's that dotted line basically with the arrow at the terminus on the north.
There.
Why not, if it drains to the south, you would carry that curtain drain around the house and basically
Here?
it would, yeah, it would
Yeah.
end up back in basically this very gentle swale on the left-hand side?
Yeah,
Is that the plan?
yes.
Because that's on the property as opposed to if you just turned that arrow to the north, to the left, to the west, to run it to that, or closer to that, pipe underneath the road. That's not on the property, I gather. Okay. Okay. I mean, it gives whatever moisture that curtain drain is carrying, I guess, more opportunity to just disperse.
The Mead Farm Road Association will no doubt dictate the size and length of the culvert to go under that new driveway at the ditch line of the road on the south side. There's an existing field drive there, but it needs to be identified so water flows through it and not stacks up there.
May I make a recommendation on that? Would you be willing to just simply equal the size of the culvert that's going under the road?
Is that an 18-inch culvert right there, and does that exist currently?
Yes.
Yes.
That's less than a year old. Paul Lamberson, guy who represents stormwater for the, Buffalo Road. It's a 18-inch corrugated was put in July, replacing an old guy.
18-inch metal culvert.
Yeah,
Plastic
I
corrugated.
thought you meant, yeah.
Replace
High-density
metal.
polyethylene
Yes, sorry about that.
versus.
Okay.
So there's gonna be, a part of that septic system is on the adjacent lot? Is that the lot line that goes through the
Yes, and on the survey map, there's an easement
easement? Okay.
to take in that finger that sticks over the line.
This one?
Yeah. See it.
Yeah, you can see that right
Yep.
here.
Okay. And we still have an issue, where's the well that is of concern here? Right there?
So this is where the well shield and the wastewater shield overlap, but the wastewater shield doesn't overlap the well,
Yeah.
and vice versa. The well shield doesn't overlap the mound system.
Actually, leach field.
So that's where I was confused, at least, I don't know if it was this one, but other ones that I thought the shields had to be completely separate from each other.
Mhm.
Could I ask a question, Scott Webb, we're the neighbors. Ron, can you explain the overlap of the shields that are depicted on there, please?
Not technically. I'm a surveyor. My son's the engineer. This is what was submitted to the state.
Yep.
Was approved.
And they're
He
going,
takes-
they're going back to look at it, just so
He-
you know.
He takes his test pits, the best test pits, 3 of them, and then depending on the contours, he lays the bed parallel with the contours, and then from there, the shield lines are based on the volume of water flowing into that mound system. That's what creates those wiggly lines. There's a formula for it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'll just mention that emails that I've received, it has not only been reviewed by Jessanne Wyman at the state for the initial permit, but Ernie Christensen took a look at also the contour lines and the isolation distances, and he was fine with them.
We have a letter here from.
You know, they have an email that was part of it.
Board members have any other questions?
Public has a question. Chance.
I'll open it up to the public. Just state your name, please.
Yeah, Paul Lamberson, again, kind of carrying the flag on the stormwater permit, and you may be teaching me more than you're obliged to teach me, but I understand, Ron, absolutely the part about the impervious area, get that. But at the same point, I hear, I guess you say that it's in the association's interest to have a culvert upsized underneath their proposed driveway. That's just neighborly pressure? I mean, how do we exert that pressure?
Well, first, if I may.
Yeah.
The board can, well, the board can go a couple of different ways on this. Probably the simplest way, because really the difference in cost between a 15-inch and 18-inch to whatever, which you would think that would go under there, is not so significant. And since you have an 18-inch culvert that goes under the roadway already, it would not be, I mean, putting in a larger than 18-inch, yes, you'll get water that will go faster across the south side of Mead Farm Road, but then it would still have to get to the culvert, and so putting in something bigger than what's actually in the road would be pretty much a waste.
Oh, right. So, how do we even get up to the road size, though, under the driveway, which is not there now?
So to answer your question,
Yeah.
if I was doing this for the town foreman would come out and say, it's gotta be so many feet long and so many inches, period. End of discussion, and I guess that's in rules most towns. But this is private.
Right.
I would think your association would have some guideline. Obviously, your association is formed after all these lots are developed, the driveways are developed, but what if a new driveway is built? Maybe I'll look at your association bylaws to see if you ought to have a piece in there that dictates what size culvert should go in there. And as Mitch says, there doesn't do you much good to have a 36-inch culvert that's under there into an 18.
Right, right.
But something very similar in diameter. But on the other hand, the length is important for the swinging in and out of the driveway.
Absolutely.
We're looking at a 8-foot driveway right there, but by the time they go in and out of that, you're probably talking 12, 14 feet there on the apron.
Sure.
And the other aspect is actually having a smaller culvert may actually have some benefits. I mean, I can talk quite a while on this. So maybe the best thing to do is to have either to work, and I'll leave this to the board, whether it's best to actually, the two of you to work or to mandate a certain size. Do you have any idea of what your association, what type of rules they have?
I do, and the smirk on my face is only because I was educated in them on an accessory apartment on that road when we discovered we had covenants, which are different, it turns out, than association rules. And this property is not part of the covenants. The covenants are back farther where somebody wanted to do it. So it's a little bit, I'm open-minded and learning, but you know, gosh, this stretch, which has been treated as a farmland, you know, gets hayed now and then, we've sort of taken a low opinion of it, not worried to. Well, as it gets developed, it's like, gee, this is when if it were town, for instance, this is when the ditch would be cleaned out at the property owner's expense. The invasive trees would be cleared out of the ditch at the property owner's expense. But I don't feel any teeth as the noisy neighbor up the road, you know.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, this the current driveway over here is the, I went out there, that's the stormwater divide. So what comes on this side of the driveway goes in this direction to that culvert. What comes on this side of the driveway comes down out and then eventually goes to this culvert. So what you're really talking about, what's flowing down in this area here, is only the applicant's property or two properties. I'll leave it.
If I could just point out the lack of teeth, which I'm not trying to get you guys to solve, but I just want to acknowledge, you know, their driveway comes down a hill, their driveway doesn't have a crown on it, so their driveway water wastes out onto the surface of Mead Farm Road. Like, you guys, could you ditch and crown? But all I can do is ask, you know, and the one time anybody touched it without their permission, I was properly reprimanded.
It actually wouldn't have much of an effect.
Oh, I'll just tell you, it does. In a good gully washer, their driveway,
Then
almost convex, goes right out into Mead Farm Road.
And if Mead Farm Road has good crown, it would go right back. out to the swale.
You're asking a lot. I mean, look at the terrain change there. We've got some momentum coming down the hill.
I'm gonna leave it
Yeah,
at
yeah.
that. Dennis?
I had another question about, if you end up redoing that curtain drain to go to the south, so there wouldn't be any drainage going to the north, because it's a pretty steep slope coming down to that mound system. You're gonna have water going both directions, even with the curtain drain.
I guess I would say water that's already going in that direction is a non-issue. It's collecting the water and sending it in that direction. So if water that they're collecting off of the hillside into the curtain drain is directed that way, then you're not making the flow to the north any worse. And that's what we try not to do, is to make, with new development, to not make the current conditions any worse.
And plus you gotta remember that a curtain drain is underground. It's only taking groundwater. It's a perforated pipe, and it's usually not, it's not a very big area to begin with, what it's actually gonna be pulling out. So,
Yeah, it's taking water off that little crest.
yeah.
But in the wintertime, when the ground's frozen, it's gonna run wherever it goes, which is when the
Well, right now-
field flooded.
Right now it's frozen, and right now the water's running any direction it wants. When the mound is constructed, a mound, the area underneath the bed is plowed. And usually they do it with a bucket, and they'll get on anywhere from 12 to 24 inches. They tear that up. So when the beds are built, as the effluent goes through the pipes in the bed and filters down through there, it's absorbed into what was plowed underneath that bed and leaches into the ground. The curtain drain is to minimize how much water off that knoll, which already runs off that knoll to the west, impacts that bed, so not to create any erosion or shorten the life of that bed.
So just going back to when, the discussion after the last meeting, when we talked about modifying the placement of the mound system, I contacted the owners, the applicants, Sherry and Deb. They didn't return phone calls. I made 2 calls to them. I emailed both Ron and emailed the applicants. There was no response. So that's kind of where we are. We offered to pay at that time to move the mound system along Mead Farm Road. So that's why we're, it's very frustrating. I've been to every meeting since it started 2 years ago. The first meeting was a discussion about where their driveway would go. There was nothing about the septic system. And the next meeting after that, there was a delay for some reason. And then next meeting, the septic system's this close to our well. Something's amiss with the system. We've had our property for 20 years. This is a new subdivision. There should be more options for putting a septic system away from an existing well. I know you say it meets the state requirements, but it's not right. You got 3 acres to put the thing, even if it's a different type of mound system or a sensitive environmental waste system.
And you're willing to pay for the proposal?
We're willing to pay to modify the permit. I think it's like $300 or $500.
So for better or worse, we do rely on the state septic rules and approvals because that is a statewide program, and if it meets those rules, we usually I can't think of a time where we said no, that doesn't make that doesn't work.
Back to the drain for a second. Is that intended to daylight somehow to the, regardless if it's going to the north or the south? Is that intended to?
The curtain drain?
Yeah, is it intended to daylight?
Saturate. It's in the ground.
Okay,
You
so
don't
I guess I
know
understood
what's
that.
the
I thought
depth
it was
of
like
it?
a ditch that was flowing
What's
into
the
the ditch by
depth
the
of it?
road.
No,
It'll be below the frost to pick it up.
It's a
so
pipe
it won't
below the
freeze in
road,
it.
usually
Water
4 feet.
seeps
Yeah,
out.
with gravel or stone on it.
Yeah, filter fabric.
there's such a high water table there, it's gonna be constantly saturated.
Actually, usually they do daylight somewhere.
Usually they do end up going somewhere, or else you haven't done anything.
I mean, what's the, I don't know. How effective is it? There's no design on it, it's just that line on the drawing.
Right, it's not constructed. It's strictly on paper. That won't be constructed until someone owns that lot.
It'll be constructed with the system that is built.
Right.
Yeah. I guess it's questionable if it doesn't daylight, what's it actually gonna do?
Usually they do daylight.
The question was brought up, why was the system put where it is? Look at where the house site is. They asked, they wanted a house site there. If we'd have put it, say, parallel to Mead Farm Road to the west of that culvert that goes under Mead Farm Road,
In this area.
look at the distance. Gonna have to pump the effluent, and that means a bigger pump. And as it is, the mound you're looking at right there is probably a 30, 40 grand mound. So that's why we do it. Now, if we couldn't fit it there because that well, we wouldn't have put it there. But we could fit it there, and it met all the criteria.
Would it be the same size if it were located along Mead Farm?
Yes.
Would the state have looked at the effectiveness of a non-daylighting drain when they're permitting that system?
Which question?
I don't know who to direct the question to, but would the state have looked at the effectiveness of a non-daylighting drain that's supposed to keep water from the system?
Well, this is permitted. All I can say, the state has looked at it twice, and they said it's okay.
Ron, since there's that arrow that's out there, and I know that there is a swale that's over here, I think the intent of it was to have it daylighted.
I don't have those plans with me, so I can't tell you. But I did talk to my son, and that can be tilted so it drains to the south, around the house site, and out across that field.
And then
so it
daylight
minimizes
it out, daylight
the
it out
impact
onto the
on
field.
Mead Farm Road.
Right, but it would be daylighted out onto the field.
Yes, yes, yes.
That's, I think, what they're
Can I just
confused
ask,
about.
there's not a lot of terrain change in that field, and it's hard for me to visualize a buried curtain drain back at the mound, find an opportunity to find daylight out in the field. It doesn't flow uphill, you know?
It's not my experience that these things daylight. It's groundwater we're dealing with, and the intent is to keep it in the ground, not to bring it to the surface. So it's my understanding that for most curtain drains like this, you keep them underground, because it's dealing with underground water.
Ralph, may I just ask clarification? I've heard that groundwater for the curtain drain moving groundwater, but the swale, ledge, whatever you want to call it, to the east that is dumping down, you're trying to get groundwater off that or surface water?
Oh, it'd be under the ground water. The whole idea of a curtain drain is there may be on certain times, and Ron, please chime in if you'd like. There may be times where water coming in from an area like, you can see the rock area, the ledge area.
You're saying groundwater?
It's going to be ground, water from the ground. The idea is that this water that might be underground, that might be flowing underground, does not impact the leach field. So what a curtain drain does is it takes water out from that.
So I believe that they had to have the depth required without the curtain drain, or else you have to prove that the curtain drain works. So I think that septic system, I think that is a curtain drain that is a good idea, but not required to design the septic system, because otherwise it would require a detailed and usually proven, I believe, lowering. If they're trying to lower the groundwater table in order to put a septic system there, you have to prove that to the state. You can't just say, I'm going to put a curtain drain make the site better. It has to perk the way it is and have the depth required to design a system, or else you need to wait and see if the curtain drain works.
Lower right is the detailed drawing, well,
Which one is it again?
a little to the right, there it is.
Right here?
So that's the curtain drain.
What's the depth of it?
I think it was 3 feet.
Yeah, it said it over.
3 feet or ledge. 4-inch pipe at the bottom.
Yeah, there's the curtain drain detail.
Or to ledge.
Really appreciate the thoroughness this conversation's having. I want to make sure that comes out loud and clear. I think by the time you start 3 feet down with the curtain drain, to get it out around the house and into the field, you have to be deeper than 3 feet at its terminus, you know, to keep the water flowing in the right direction.
Well,
It's not supposed to park and settle, right? It's supposed to, is it supposed, maybe I'm getting that wrong. It's supposed to flow or just kind of perk?
Flow.
Okay, flow.
It is supposed to flow.
This is heavy
and
soil.
And, I mean, there are ones that don't daylight and there are ones that do daylight. I would think this arrow over here, and you know your road very well, how there is a swale that goes along here.
Yep.
And it's a pretty deep swale.
There, yeah.
So it's very possible that what would come out over here would daylight. And I'll just also say it's a 4-inch perforated pipe. The flow that you're going to get out of a relatively flat 4-inch, I mean, think about it, it's only that big versus something that like you'd have, this is like the pipe size that you'd have under so the amount of flow that would be there, and also considering the slope, how much flatter that would be, is usually very minimal. And it's usually not even considered when you're looking at stormwater, because it is supposed to be a very minimal.
Well, if that is in fact an exit there, that arrow where your hand is, the comparable contour out in the meadow is about where the letter D is on field.
So
Because that's
instead of
basically the
this-
same contour.
Yeah, somewhere out.
So somewhere between that and the next contour is
Yeah.
where that elevation would surface naturally, if in fact it were at a constant elevation. So that's still, if in fact it does surface at that point, that's about the length of that curtain drain. If you were to go around the house the other direction.
I would like to apologize for any confusion because I was misunderstanding. I thought that was like a swale, and it was catching surface water coming off that hillside and redirecting it around the mound into the ditch. So
It does
I
do
was
some
not.
of that too, Dick, I think.
Well, I mean, if the gravel goes to the surface, it will catch some of
Sure.
it, but yeah, a lot of it could flow over. I was thinking it was also to protect the above surface mound as
And
much as anything else. And
Actually, that's actually what it is going to do, because the idea here is what's being backfilled. It's going to be backfilled with stone wrapped over here. So yes, water coming down that hillside, hitting this, a lot of it's going, much of it is going to infiltrate right through here, hit that pipe, and then be moved around.
It's going to have an impact on flow. To some.
yeah, I mean, if you get enough flow, it'll flow right across the top of it, right? It's only a 6-inch slot of gravel.
And not only that, actually, well, yeah, it has to go through the time of actually percolating through,
Right.
and then filling up that pipe before actually even coming out, so, yeah.
If that was gonna flow to the south, it would be considerably deeper than 3 feet, because right now that line, if you go to the south, is uphill.
Yeah, it's gonna vary in terms of the depth, because just the contours itself varies.
Sure. The 420 line looks like it kind of follows right up along the side of the mound.
Yeah, and I think the intent, looking at the contours and the detail, was that it was going to be a north-flowing flow, which mostly would be, yeah, it basically would take the stuff off the surface and from the ground, and actually take back part of what I said before. It's actually going to allow some additional infiltration of that water, and probably reduce the overall flow coming off the mound to some degree, because you're going to be changing the time of concentration on it. So, yeah. long story short, yeah, it should be a benefit.
But, so, is it going north or south?
Gonna move it south. That's what the concern was, is how much is headed towards Mead Farm Road. So during construction, we'll tilt that to the south.
So, I mean, we can put conditions that it be converted to the south, and if there are trouble with it, they can come back to the board and discuss correction or whatever, so.
And actually, from a stormwater standpoint, especially Paul mentioning how much of a concern they had for that swell, it would be a benefit. And actually, I didn't even realize until just a moment ago how that would be a significant benefit to that swell that happens to be along the south end of the road, so, yeah.
And that's, again, educating, that's something this body's able to say, north versus south?
Yeah, well, the applicant has offered to do it, and
Right.
The board would be willing to do that as a condition of approval.
So, yeah, just your earlier question about like the pipe under the road, so we're not engineers. So if this had been like a full, all-new subdivision, there would have been a stormwater plan for how the stormwater moves through the whole system. An engineer would have looked at each of those culverts and figured out where the water was coming on, and they would have sized the culverts. So in our case, we'd be relying on your stormwater, you know, they must have done some engineering for it. But we can also kind of look at it and say, okay, it goes under the road over to that next culvert. It's a serial line. There's no additional, large amounts of water that are entering. So you could sort of wave your hands and say the same size culvert should be ample. But generally, we would be relying on engineering input for stuff like that.
So you got one other issue with, if they're gonna bury a power line to the house, the only power line is almost right at the end of the mound system. That's, our power line is buried underneath Mead Farm Road. If they're gonna bury it, I don't know what route they would use. It would almost be like a beeline under the mound to the house, unless they put it elevated. I don't know if there's some map that, because that's gonna impact something at some point.
They may have to come from Silver Street for all we know. It will have to be underground.
So the existing line obviously comes from Silver Street, and then it goes, there's one pole in our field, not too far from the culvert, and then the next pole is at the end of the mound system that's proposed.
So there's poles up Mead Farm Road?
Yes.
Yeah.
Both bone and GMP.
We don't get into placing power lines. We leave that up to power companies. We've done it in the past and we were wrong, so we leave it up to power company.
Well, I'm gonna make a motion to close the public hearing and take this up in deliberative session.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, you're up. I gotta recuse myself.
And, John?
Sure.
Jason, I was gonna add this up.
Sure.
I don't know if there's,
Whichever one. Yeah, I'd start with the sketchbook. There we go.
let's do this becomes very
The
psychedelic.
mic, huh? Nice setup.
So this is a two-lot subdivision sketch plan. Applicant Mike Place.
If you want to try using the pointer, the only thing is the battery just comes out. It's this thing over here that actually makes it work. So just try to make sure it doesn't pop out. I guess the part of the reason why. I mean, if you want.
Throw it against the wall?
I don't know. Just it disappeared for a while and just recently reappeared. So anyway. All right, Dick. Whenever you're ready.
Oh,
Whenever you're set.
sorry. Yeah, so let's go ahead. This is for two-lot subdivision sketch plan. Applicant of Michael Place.
Sure. Jason Barnard and Jarvis. We're here on behalf of Hilton Elaine Place, Michael Place. The existing property is located at the intersection of Place Road and Route 116, north of town. It was the old driving range, Place driving range. You can see sort of the outline of where the tee boxes were elevated. Existing, I assume that's where all the golf balls and where everything was kept, all the for the driving range. As proposed, the existing 11 acre lot, plus or minus. Here's the subdivision line here, outlined in red. 3.5 acre lot being lot number 1, 8.1 being lot number 2. Currently, we are proposing 1 3-bedroom single-family home on lot number 1, or Mr. and Mr. Place are proposing that. Secondly, with lot number 2, an existing or a proposed duplex, each of which would be served by on-site mound systems. One does have a curtain drain, to add that to the discussion.
You can tell us what we don't know.
Well, a curtain drain is twofolds. It lowers the groundwater table and it diverts the surface water, and they always daylight. If they don't daylight, they're essentially an ineffective drain. So they daylight. In the case this daylights in both directions.
Okay then. Should I leave now? Where's that egg? Can you mark that here?
I was in the audience. I couldn't see it.
Just stand there. Now one of those contractors always look at me funny.
But back to, and the orthos do really tell a pretty good picture of the overall parcel. You can see, and one of the things we noticed, or Mitch brought up in his staff report, there is an existing drainage that starts one corner of the property up here by Place Road. That is a man-made drainage swale that was put in at the time the driving range was constructed. That does flow intermittently, seasonal, in a northerly direction. You can see the outline of the area of disturbance that was previously associated with the driving range. There are 2 hedgerows on the property, or a hedgerow here and a hedgerow on the south. Part of the layout for the subdivision was to take advantage of these existing features to protect and isolate things so that it wasn't disturbed, so that we were in an already disturbed area. The rest of the parcel remaining open, could still continue to be used for agriculture. There is force main pipes that would go through the fields, but once installed at a depth of 5 feet, the land could be tilled, it could continue to be used. So served by a proposed shared drive with a 60-foot right-of-way. We meet all the applicable setbacks in terms of zoning. There are 2 building envelopes proposed, but we would be keeping those building envelopes within the disturbed area and outside of, and we'll touch on sort of the wetland area in a moment. There is some discussion with essentially orienting this hedgerow that's on the north side of lot number 1 house in a more northerly direction so that it does protect those neighbors to the north and open up a little more building envelope so that we're not so restricted. The second sort of little feature that was talked about was this 18-foot wide strip, which does touch on 116. That is a pre-existing part of the property that was intended originally to bring utilities in from that 116 corridor. It's still part of that parcel. The parcel has been surveyed. The lot, it is subject to an Act 250 permit, so we would have to get an amendment once we get proceeding with this, because the driving range did trigger Act 250. So that will be part of it. The one sort of natural feature that we talked about and included on the site plan was this small area of wetlands. Two things to note. That is not a mapped Class 2 wetland, okay? That is not shown on the Vermont State Wetlands Inventory map. It's not shown on the National Wetlands Inventory map, all right? That is on the A&R map, which is called a Wetlands Advisory Layer. These were flown a while ago, and they just sort of pick up a feature. The wetland buffer, with it being a non-Class 2 wetland, we've actually gone more conservative and have thrown on a 50-foot buffer, which if it's not a mapped Class 2 wetlands, there's not actually a buffer associated with it. 50-foot buffers are associated with Class 2 wetlands. So as a precaution, we've actually thrown on the 50 feet. We could even be a little bit further away from where that buffer is, if need be. And we really tried to stay, you know, most cases, with the exception of where the force main is, we are 70 feet away or 75 feet away from where anything is. And there again, a Class 3 wetland, we're not even required to stay 50 feet away from. So I just want to point that out in regards to the wetland. There was some discussion in the staff report in terms of having a wetland delineation performed. In my opinion, with a non-wetland that's not on the state wetlands inventory, I think we can be a little conservative, stay away from it, and be away from that area, and take all precautions necessary, whether it be with silt fence when the construction is going on, but we certainly would be well away from that area with any construction. It's already been disturbed here at that point where you see the green space. So in that intent, and then we did prepare for the board the remaining natural resources. I don't know if Mitch, can you pull that up? And if you can have both up at the same time. So just to go back to SK1, which is our sketch plan, and I have you go in just a little bit closer if you can on that. Maybe 50. There you go. All right. So,
That good?
that's perfect. Yep. As you can see, when Mr. Place and we met out at the site, really one of the main objectives of laying out the subdivision were to keep things sort of in that southwesterly corner, in an area that had already been disturbed, basically, you know, conserving by default the remaining open land that's associated with that parcel. There would be two mound systems that would serve the duplexes here. Those are actually located on the best soils of the property. Or there's a small tree island right out in this area towards the far easterly boundary. The toes of the mound system have been graded out so they meet the 25-foot setback or 10-foot setback with the toes and 25 feet from the bed. So that does meet the isolation distance. The state engineer was out there, looked at all the test pits with me. We have hired a hydrogeologist to do some more detailed, what's called site-specific mounding analysis to show that effluent, there'll be no hydraulic connection between these two systems because they are so close. We also wanted, when he was there, we wanted to verify what the linear loading rate or the loading rates with this system would be, and we're conservative with that mound as well. So has a published report that will be going into the state. I've done this on a number of systems with him, and the second thing that we did to keep the height of the mound systems down is actually we've instituted some advanced treatment systems with these. So instead of 2.5 or 2.5 feet of sand, we actually can knock it down to 1.5 feet of sand. It saves a little bit of sand, and it does knock down the height of the system as well. So there's a lot of conservative measures that would be built into the wastewater systems. The subdivision's laid out in such a manner that it really consolidates it to one corner of the property. It does minimize the amount of impervious area. We haven't done the final calculations on that yet, but I'll be willing, we're probably pretty close to 1/4 acre or less. And if erosion control has to be done, that should be really, again, consolidated to that southwest corner of the property. So if you want to flip over to the natural resources.
How,
If you all answer questions on the site plan?
yeah, what is the ramifications of the weight of the mound system on the neighbors? Or is that gonna be close to their wells, or it looks, I mean, on a map, it's kind of close to.
In terms of, and Mr. Place can probably speak more to this, that is actually one of his relatives that owns on the other side. But the map's obviously cut off. We meet the separation to the lines. If you want to just slide it the map a little bit more to the west, I can sort of point that out. West. To the left. Yep.
Well, that's just as far as it goes here.
Well, let's see.
No, the other way, out towards
You wanna go to
the east side of the site, yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
There you go.
So you'll see in this area here, we actually shot a pin. We were able to offset the grading of the toes of the two mounds. Are required to be 10 feet. We're a little bit more than that. The beds are actually required to be 25 feet. We're a little bit more than that. Generally speaking, groundwater flow is in this direction. There aren't any wells that I identified within 100 feet.
They're probably the closest ones, 500 or 600 feet at least.
Okay, because I can just see on a bigger map that it doesn't look that far away from the next house.
Yeah, well,
but I don't know where their well is, so.
So there is going to be overshadowing, which you guys have probably had a pretty good education on that by this point. There will be overshadowing 100 feet to the east, 100 feet to the south, and also downslope 200 feet. Looks like those mounds will overshadow Glenn's place, his property on the east and out to the north.
And what about to the west, the Lee property and Rushford? That's what I was curious about.
Those will be overshadowed as well. My understanding is these here are all served by municipal water. So wells don't come into play. The one thing that we are going to have to look at when we finish our final designs, that the location of our wells relative to their septic systems. That's going to be one thing we have to research and sort of tweak. Ideally, we'd have individual wells serving each property. Worst case, we could always do a fallback and have one shared well that serves both units. I prefer not to go that way. If you get into more than 25 people, you become a public water system. It's a lot more involved in terms of long-term monitoring. So ideally, we'd be something like we have with the ground going uphill in this direction. I would expect their systems, if they're gravity fed, to be on the lower side of the house. I don't expect it to be an issue.
So they're served by town water, but they're on septic systems.
In on-site systems, yeah. The municipal sewer doesn't go out this far, but the town water does.
So is there consideration about linking up with town water? Or?
On this project, if it were available, we'd love to. But
I think it is for small scale.
I'll make a comment on that, basically, and I know if Eric is listening, he'll agree on this. Basically, areas like what you have with these houses here that are outside of the water service area are called legacy connections. They're not improving them, they're not adding any more. And these properties here are beyond the actual water service area. So these particular connections can continue as they happen to be, but they're not doing any more new connections on that.
And I think, and I could be wrong, but I know, and Mike can probably speak to this better, but there is already an existing water main on Place Road.
Yeah.
Correct?
It goes to our house.
It goes to your house.
We're the last one.
Okay, you're the last one on the line. So, at this point, to answer your question, no. We're not planning to connect to town water. One thing that I will note is when we come time and get the state permit for this, we can always amend it and get connected to town water if they're not built out yet. So, it's a possibility, but that's not what's proposed. Any other questions on the site plan?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I assume staff has done the math and the lot this size warrants 3 units?
Basically, for the duplex, this is in the RR1 zoning district, and unlike the RR2 or the ag, which has the density calculation, the RR1 is a straight 3-acre zoning, and for a duplex, you need to have twice that. So the minimum for lot 2 would have been 6 acres. The minimum for lot 1 would be 3 acres, and they do meet those sizes. The other thing I just simply, since before we actually go, I'll just make a couple of comments. I did go out and take a look at this ditch, re-looked at the regulations as far as the definitions. I mean, the zoning administrator actually has the authority if there's something that actually meets the thing of an unmapped stream, and this does not come even close to meeting that. It's I would say it's something that's like 2 feet wide, and if I were to say 6 inches deep, I think that would be kind of pushing it.
It'd be kind of pushing it. It may be about spots you may find it a little deeper.
Yeah, it's really kind of a swell. So I just wanted to reiterate that it's not a map stream on that. It is for what it happens to be. I also took a trip out there and looked at this. Not that I'm an expert at it, but I've seen a lot of wetlands over these decades, and I couldn't see anything that was very different from one area to another. So I would concur. It is a good probability that there is no wetland that happens to be there. The only reason why we just happen to mention it is the fact that you are kind of using it to create your building envelopes. So if hypothetically there would be a wetland there, that it may actually have an effect as to locating where those building envelopes are. But yes, even if there's as you mentioned, class 3 wetlands, which hypothetically at most this may be, wouldn't require a
they don't require a buffer, essentially.
Yeah,
a class 3 wetland doesn't require a buffer. And really, like Mitch said, I mean, if you point out, this is I'll call it an intermittent swale. That was a man-made swale, putting it in at the time the driving range was constructed. I mean, if you look at that, you can clearly see what the limits of disturbance are. Well, we're trying to keep everything to the west of that intermittent drainage swale that does flow, that does promote drainage, it does carry water away. So, you know, conservatively speaking, we did put a 50-foot buffer on there. With a class 3 wetland, you're not required to. I will point out that since there is already an Act 250 permit on this, they would have had to have looked at the wetlands prior to this. And I know that Act 250 wouldn't have had them disturb out if there were any wetlands. So that's another sort of one thing. And as part of this, we'll have to review the Act 250 permit. They may have already looked at this earlier on. Someone may have come out and said everything looks good. The wetlands advisory layer is just what it's called. It's an advisory layer. Basically, you go out and take a look at it. If you don't see the features, and when I was out there, like I told Mitch said this, it all pretty much looks like the same field across there. So we can even stay further away if that's a requirement. I don't see the need to spend the money with a delineation or wait the time, because now we'd be looking at sometime end of April, first part of May.
So I think you mentioned the water lines going out there, those will not impede agricultural use?
Those will not, as a requirement of the force main, and those are carrying what's going to be treated effluent. They should be at least 5.5 feet in the ground. 4.5 feet, if they get ledge, they can blue board them, the contractor can, at our discretion when they get constructed. But even with the pre-treated effluent, basically you're taking out all, a lot of the bacteria that creates heat within the water, so you definitely want to make sure they're 5.5 feet in the ground. So to make a long story short, they could run a big combine over those things and no one would ever know it. You'll be fine.
All right.
Resource layers, you had resource layers?
Yep, you had a resource map.
And let's see. What I could do is I can just
You
zoom
want to
out.
go one and one?
Yeah, actually.
I'll talk about one and then we can quickly touch on each
Yeah,
one.
let's go there, and yeah.
So the first one, again, that is a GIS base. That's where the wetlands advisory layer shows up. Any state mapped, Vermont state inventory wetlands are up in this wooded area. Same with any national wetlands. There aren't any state wetlands or national wetlands mapped on the property. And again, we threw on the 50-foot buffer just to be really cautious.
And I see a couple markers for, I assume, potential well sites, but you still, I assume, have some homework to do to find out whether or not.
Yeah, I mean, we still basically, at this point in time, we've gone out with a GPS unit, a survey grade GPS unit, shot topo in that area, shot topo and located our test bits. We still have to sort of fill in the gaps with our survey. We have to tie into the boundaries that were there when we finish up our final plat. But when we go out with the survey crew, basically we'll talk to these three neighbors, find out where their wastewater systems are, and then be able to locate those with GPS and put them on state plane grid.
Is there known problems with water quantity in this area, or is it a?
I actually haven't researched the well logs.
Okay.
I don't expect.
That's not for this phase. I'm
Not
just
for
wondering
this
if you
part.
know.
I don't expect there to be. Honestly, worst case, in terms of if you get a low yielding well, storage is always an option. I mean, it's not unheard of. It's not uncommon. We do it quite often. But I don't expect, especially in this valley, to have a water quantity issue.
Okay.
You can always get sulfur. That's a hit and miss thing. I'll go to the next one.
Over, straight.
We can go to the right. So this agricultural soils, you can see the green areas of prime ag soil that are mapped out. These can continue to be used even with the forest mains in place. There is a small sliver of prime ag soils here. I will say, based on actual field data, with the test bits that I did in that area, I would not consider those to be prime agricultural soils. They're more of a silt loam soil, and hence the curtain drain. What I'm trying to do is effectively lower the water table from beneath the mound system in that area. So there would be a mound system on those prime ag soils, really, or where they're mapped as, but we don't believe they are. And that is the place where that system would have to go. Everything else is proposed outside of, and they're in statewide soils. They're not mapped as prime ag soils. You can see in the sort of the tan.
So what's the VEB versus CAC
Oh, those
designation?
that's Virgins clay, Virgins clay. I'm assuming that's Peru soils.
Yeah, Peru and
probably that's a Cabot. Cabot
California,
soil.
for talking geography. We
California.
got Peru, we got
I can
California.
guarantee you there's not many California soils out
The
there.
first two letters of the type of soils, the
Yeah.
the letter at the end is refers to the slope.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are USDA soil designations of what those are.
You're saying there's no flexibility that northeast or that northwest mound system to move it further to the east?
There's not.
Okay.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
That is the location.
I looked it up. Those are good draining soils over there.
That's it. And then these here, I would say, are not mapped. I mean, generally speaking, the USDA soils are pretty close. They're not always right on the money, but they're generally pretty close. This is a little better than they show over there. And I'll go to the slopes. Should be the final one. And steep slopes, as you can see, less than 5%, or 5 to 15%. And I'll tell you on this site, 15% is a real stretch. It's probably 5 to 10% max over the whole site, and I mean max. It's really flat. Better reference other than the slope maps is back on the site plan. We actually brought in the LiDAR contours. Those give you, and I think they're 2-footers. Either my eyes are getting bad.
Yeah, I think they are.
Okay. Yeah, they're 2 foot. They're the LiDAR contours. So what's happened now is that all of Chittenden and Addison, most of Addison County have been flown, and when we're on state plane grid, we can tie in all the LiDAR contours. So those, better than the natural resources map, those give you a very good indication of the slope, and those are, it's really flat. It tightens up a little bit in this corner, but everything is really pretty flat.
I'll just state you're not affecting any primary or secondary resources as far as slopes on this project. On that part. Regarding slopes. And minimalizing your effect on the ag.
I mean, it's a lot of thought has gone into it. It's condensed. Any questions from the board?
So I don't see any red marks in the staff comments. Is there anything
Well,
you want to highlight from that?
Just simply, you have this oddity that's, it's a pre-existing non-conforming feature. And it's either, we actually had a bunch of conversations thinking about it. Is it better to create a 200-foot frontage here to get a conforming frontage but still have this non-conformity that happens to be there? Or to have no frontage at all like this with the right-of-way and still have this non-conforming frontage? And after a lot of discussion on the third floor, we just said, either which way, it's still a pre-existing non-conformity that's going to exist in some particular way.
On the less than 100 feet.
Show the board what it would look like if you wanted to try to squeeze it 200 foot. It really looks goofy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even include that.
Yeah.
Just basically saying that we just kind of looked at it and said, and came to the conclusion after a lot of discussion, a lot of thought, and it's funny, the little things that you spend a lot of time talking about, is that either which way, it's an existing nonconformity. The property works fine without it. The only thing you may just want to do is just put a condition in the approval that 18 feet will never be used for access.
Right.
As ridiculous as that might sound. But staff just, planning and zoning, we just recommend,
Yep.
just let it be a pre-existing non-conforming thing that just is gonna continue to be a pre-existing non-conforming thing, whichever way it looks at.
So, I mean, isn't there hundreds of feet of frontage along Place Road?
There is.
They have 400 and some odd, so
Yeah, I can, if you scale it, you can go a little bit.
the.
Oh, so it's just the northern lot that,
That's right.
that doesn't have any frontage.
Correct.
Okay,
It
okay.
has 18 feet on
Yeah.
116.
Okay.
And whether it happens to be a corner lot or a 400 feet are is what's required in the RR1 zoning district to have a conforming frontage. So it would be a non-conforming frontage if it was the only frontage, or if it was combined with a conforming frontage on Place Road West.
But we have lots of subdivisions where only the front lots are on the road, and then the road pushes back through the lot.
And that's
So
why we have our 60-foot right away.
50.
I mean, this map that Rolf has, we did this quickly before I came, but it does, we can do it. It really makes it for a terrible lot.
Actually, you'd have to angle it to be 100 feet, but
Yeah.
we could work.
I mean, we can physically do it, but really it's not very.
It says 50 on there right away.
Is it 50?
50. It's a 50-foot right away.
Okay.
They have.
I'm
You could technically put a 60, but 50 is all that's required.
probably due to up my prescription.
Is there on the ag land, the prime ag land, the septic system on that? Is there anything in our ordinance about?
Well, agricultural soils are listed as a secondary resource. Unlike a primary resource where you can't touch it at all, secondary resources can be impacted, but the board tries to minimize the amount of impact that would be on a secondary resource. So what they're supposed to do is minimize that impact, and a force main that will be placed, and then you're going to end up fixing it up and so forth. It's not even considered a structure, the septic system.
I was talking about the mound system on the.
Oh, yeah. I mean, same type of thing.
They can go
well, you know, that's
up to the curtain drain.
Actually, let me take it's a qualitative decision that the board has to make. The entire property is considered ag soils. So do you feel that the amount that's being disturbed in this proposed development is trying to lessen the effect on the overall? They are allowed with the secondary resource to provide some disturbance, but are they overdoing the disturbance on that? That's the qualitative decision you would have to make. And I mean, looking at the entire size of the property and that they're only disturbing this particular corner.
Yeah, it seems like the whole layout minimizes the disturbance of the whole property, the way the buildings are located.
Actually, in our regs, the septic is not really considered a disturbance in that sense.
And does the curtain drain basically daylight in that minor swale?
It does. Actually, this one would be designed to hit the high point of the land and daylight in both directions.
Got it.
Call turning.
And there's no anticipated impact from the daylight to the west to the adjacent properties there.
Basically, with a curtain drain of this nature, once the water table is lowered, and what it does is it lowers the groundwater table beneath the mound as it flows across the site. You're going to have minimal water that runs out the end of those pipes, except when you get a heavy, heavy rain event. You'll get some rain in there. You do design these drains with stone right to the surface. They're sort of a twofold drain. They intercept sheet flow across the ground surface, and they also lower the water table. So to answer your question, during heavy rains there'll be some discharge. It'll discharge that existing swale, flow out to the north, daylight here, basically go overland into the grass, and eventually most of it will probably infiltrate back into the upper topsoil layers.
And does that existing swale basically wrap around the Lee property, it looks like?
It goes right through, and then looks like it comes out. Whoop. Yep. I'm not sure if that's the swale or the edge of the lawn, but it does continue on, and maybe Dennis or Mike can answer more. Goes right on there, right up the north property line, or
Yeah, it goes right.
between?
Yep.
So the curtain drain though won't, it's not increasing, once the ground table, once the water is lowered, then it's not increasing the net flow.
Negligible.
It's gonna add a little bit, maybe more flow, rather than a sheet flow across that whole topography, it's gonna add a little bit of concentration to that swale, but.
All of that water is already going that direction.
Yeah.
All we're doing is putting it into a pipe and putting it into that drainage. It's going that way already.
So do curtain drains, I assume they must require some 10-year or something maintenance? I mean, yeah, I would think you have to remove the gravel on the top and remove any silt that's gotten trapped in there.
They probably over time do silt in and become less and less effective. They should probably be redone. Most of these mound systems are at a period where they last 25 to 30 years. And at that point, you have to generally rebuild the bed of the system, where you take the stone out, put clean stone in, recover it, put your pipes back. The state does not require that these drains be rehabbed at the same time. They'll still continue to move water even after the stone gets, because they're going to be more permeable than the native soils that are around it for our lifetimes and beyond.
And a lot of these stones are covered, well, they're generally covered with filter fabric that
Yes.
keeps a lot of the sediment out. It allows the water in, but keeps the sediment, most of the sediment out.
Most of the sediment out. So they are sort of, like Mitch says, the stone is sort of wrapped with fabric, which is the purpose, to keep that out.
Thank you. And so, let's see, you say here, and that looks like in total impervious surface is probably gonna exceed the 10,000?
Yeah, it seems to me that.
It's going to be real close. It's going to be real close. You know, we're going to be. We tried. That was one of the things to try to keep everything in that corner, was to stay out of, you know, stay out of it, but not to have to restore water if possible. Really shouldn't be all that difficult on a site such as this. We're really not going to have that much water to treat. If we're over 10,000 square feet, it's just over 10,000 square feet. Most of that nowadays would be done with rooftop disconnects, where the gutters go into a rain barrel or a rock garden or something that can actually filter the water. Ultimately, everything's going to flow north to the existing drainage, and they're probably going to be grassy swales that connect up to that. So there's your treatment.
And as only a 2-lot subdivision, we're looking at this as a simple.
It's a minor.
Minor, that's the word. Okay.
So it would be here and then go right to final.
Yeah. So I think I've exhausted my questions. If there's anything else from the board, if not, we'll open it up to the public for any questions. Oh, sorry. As long as are you done with your presentation?
I'm set.
Okay. So.
Stimulating stuff, isn't it?
I think they're all,
I just
all
want
against
to.
it.
They appear to be clearly against it.
I just want to, actually, if I may, I didn't have to say it for the last one, but I'll just mention it here. If you'd like to be considered interested parties, you can just make a comment. You could say, I like the project, I don't like the project. You can get yourself on a list. Should sometime in the future you want to be part of an appeal or anything like that. Or else, if you're all happy with everything, you don't have to.
I have to be happy with it. I'm married to him, so.
Now's your chance.
I can say we did have a phone call from Karen Lee, who was one of the neighbors on 116, and she was very supportive of it.
The openness of the land is really appealing.
Yeah.
Just based on conversations of past with your dad, he has wanted it open, so.
Can we get a couple names for the
Love it, you.
Yeah, actually, can we help Dawn out here? Just your names?
Mary Place.
Vicky Pelkey.
Thank you.
I move to close the public hearing and direct staff to draft conditions of approval.
Second. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Actually, the one thing I want to know though is wetland delineation to no wetland delineation.
No know what.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then that's how I'm gonna draft it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good job.
Thank you.
Yes.
So John. Here.
I'm recusing myself.
Thanks for sending me that.
Oh.
Yeah, I
Happy-
had trouble
happy-
opening the Dropbox. It's on my phone, I tried to get the app.
Usually it's just clicking it. Oh, and just one comment.
So Dennis. on a
Champlain
prior
College, I did the
discussion about
design
Black Rock,
for
it was
when we did put a
determined I
curtain
should
drain in.
recuse
Yes.
myself.
And it was under the
So I'm
ground.
doing that
it
again.
got there- it daylighted, but to a catch basin.
Okay.
You could do that.
Yeah,
And,
are you
no, Theo wanted to say
client or
is
something,
you go
or,
up to
I
the
mean,
surface,
or-
it's
They-
all underground.
One of my partners
Yep.
did a
So you
project for
can do
them.
that.
So you can.
But yes, it was
Yeah,
daylighted.
it's up to you, totally up to you.
It's, yeah, I mean,
I mean, do you feel like that's a conflict of interest?
Discussed it, I derive part of my income in 1913 from them, so,
Okay.
I don't know.
I don't know if
I recused myself the last time, it wasn't Greg, was the one that was
Yeah,
pretty vocal.
Okay.
Surprise. So,
Yes,
Well,
we
we
had
do
you
have
waiting
alternates,
for a
so
little while.
yeah.
That's it.
Well, it's too bad, because it's a conversation I'm interested in, but.
I was going
You're welcome to
to,
sit in the audience.
I was
Be
going
part
to
of the
have that
conversation
one
that
up.
way.
And, all right, I guess we have, this is,
Good.
and Alice would not forgive me if I didn't say that this is a discussion. There really shouldn't be any qualitative type decisions, but it's not a public meeting, although we are going to be public. Right, no decisions made, no, any type of thing, but this is just an opportunity for a developer who's has had an application that has been put on ice for a while. No fault of theirs in the sense of the water issues that the town has had. We've been continuing per request, and actually you could even make a request on that too if you wanted to continue for another 6 months. But basically, it's a developer who's just checking in with the DRB and wants to just get some basic feedback, non-binding feedback. So with that, Ben Avery.
Perfect. Thanks everybody for having this on the agenda this evening. Just a quick update on the water source items we've been working on with the select board. We did last month reach a water source development agreement with the board. We've moved past any objection period to that, so we're in the process of getting that signed. Also, logistically, we're working this week actually with Eric Bailey on getting the big fancy testing done for the water, for the actual water coming out of the well. So the initial tests were positive, and then there's a whole broad spectrum tests they do to meet state regulations. So we've begun that. Following that, the next steps will be to drill the well out to a wider diameter. It's a 480-foot, 6-inch test well right now. We've agreed to drill it to 8 inches and go an additional 220 feet. But town staff, meaning Eric Bailey, feels pretty comfortable about this well, so I think we're going to coordinate with them to perhaps drill it even wider down to bedrock, which is part of the standard required to develop a public water source. So we're really working in conjunction with town staff to bring that online. Without getting into all the nitty-gritty of the agreement, the long and short is that we at our expense drill the well. That creates an opportunity based on the raw gallons per minute to have an estimated yield, which is, by terms of the agreement, 50%. So if there's
300 gallons a minute, the estimated state permitted yield would be half that number. And then we are allowed 30% of that number to allocate towards a first phase of our project. And under the terms of the agreement, we can apply for allocation, assuming there is matching wastewater, and move forward with a preliminary plat. So that's sort of the mechanics of how this all works. And we anticipate, based on timing, that we'll likely submit a preliminary plat application sometime in the next 90 days. So, and the way the logistics of that work is it all sort of happens at the same time. It's a trade, if you will, of us dedicating that well to the town, and at the same time the town giving us those allocations, which we obviously have to do in order to satisfy the requirements for a preliminary plat. So it sort of all happens at the same time, different offices all on one day. But that
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Or should I let you finish?
No, go ahead.
So is it my understanding that if the town grants you that 30% of whatever yield, 30% of the 50%.
Yes.
Water and wastewater allocation.
It goes hand in hand.
How do you mean?
So the wastewater in the
Well, there's wastewater allocation that is currently available.
Right.
So we can't ask for more wastewater than is available. So we are hostage on this phase one to however many GPD are available right now on wastewater.
So you might actually have more water than you do
We will have
wastewater.
more
Okay.
water than we do wastewater.
Now, I wonder, does the town promise you if we ever get more wastewater that goes to you, or is that outside of
No,
this?
this agreement has nothing to do with wastewater. So right now,
Except only in the fact that right now we allocate them together. Do you know what,
Yeah.
you understand my
Well,
questions?
And basically, yes, and basically and it's actually not an equal. Usually there's more water quantity allocation than wastewater, as it turns out. So, and I think we generally just defer that to
The select board?
Eric Bailey, the Public Works Superintendent. So.
Is there enough wastewater available for this project right here?
Yes. Give or take.
And does that leave anybody else any, or is it?
No, they're taking it all.
No, I don't know how they're allocating
It is
sewer
my
now.
understanding, this is not a 100% max out. It is what is available, again, give or take. Eric is the keeper of the exact number. And this might rise or fall by a couple of units, depending on what that exact number is because we need to stay under the 80% cap.
I'll also throw in that there is under the existing system potentially some additional water capacity. They've been dealing with so many different leaks that as you know, they could not actually put together an actual water availability for this particular year because of all the different problems that they had with the water system. Simply put, the water and wastewater ordinance basically says you can't really consider an application, a preliminary or final subdivision application, or a site plan application without sufficient water and wastewater capability if it's in the municipal water wastewater area. So, as a matter of fact, it even dictates that if it doesn't exist, you actually could be the perfect project, but you'd have to deny it just basically on that. But you're basically saying that that's all going to be taken care of and something that the board can then consider a project on all of its merits.
The one caveat is that there is a restriction, obviously, that we can't pull a building permit until the water is online. So we could go through this whole process, we could get approved here, we could go to Act 250, and if the town doesn't develop the well and bring it online for some reason, we can't tap into water that isn't there. So that's sort of the blended risk that we've had to take, that we would move forward with a project and technically speaking, we could have a fully approved project and not be able to build it until the water's online. So
I'll just mention though that the town, the actual systems itself will really be able to become more economical, function a lot better, be able to maintain itself better with more users. So the town is looking for.
And I think that part of the, in all of the discussions with the select board, as they're looking at the larger wastewater problem, the water problem's one thing. Actually, financially, the wastewater is a larger issue. So something like this, through an agreement like this, begins to generate fees, which then can be applied towards beginning to evaluate and attack the wastewater problem.
So you'd still have to pay, everybody would have to pay a hookup fee?
Yeah, it's well, if you add the water and wastewater together, it's $14,000 a unit. So, give or take, there's $1 million+ in fees right there.
And the wastewater right now is first come, first served?
Correct.
Okay.
But you can't get a wastewater
Without water.
Exactly.
Without water being available.
Right, but this agreement though is just, it's just a promise that water will be available to you. It's not, by saying you get 30% of the water, that doesn't mean you they've already granted you an equal amount of wastewater. You still have to go through the wastewater request process.
Correct. But right now, when you apply for water wastewater allocation, it's a hard stop right now because there is no water. Right. So what this agreement allows us to do is it allows us to get that allocation based on the future water. That's the consideration.
And
for
this is a select board. I mean, this is just, I'm just asking the question.
Yeah,
It's completely about your agreement with the select board, but it's just interesting because there might not be enough wastewater to match 30% of the water.
I can tell you that there
will
won't be.
not be. I hear that. So it's just interesting to me. Does that mean if any wastewater comes up, do you automatically
it goes back into the pool?
Oh, okay. You're not gonna. In theory, you wouldn't hold on to, like, say you got 18% and you're gonna hold on and say the first 12 that becomes available is ours.
Correct. So we've now. I mean, in theory, that could happen if nobody came through and utilized it. But right now, our entire goal has been to how do we move a first phase forward that's a meaningful phase that touches on all of the different uses that the town plan is looking for, that's a natural extension of the existing settlement pattern, all of these things. And how do we tailor that to, again, really it's the wastewater number we're tailing to, not the water. So we're not, if this well were to perform in the way that the early indicators look like it's going to, it's likely plenty of water once it goes online to satisfy this project, the one to the south, and maybe the one across the street too. So, and it's, I think the select boards hope there are a couple of other well sites, and I know that there's been some internal discussion that's hopeful that now that we've gotten through this and we have a model for it, perhaps one of the other developers is interested in a similar structure.
They'll build our wastewater.
Well, probably not the wastewater, but certainly to get the town's water supply together. So, tackling one challenge at a time.
I'll just mention regulatorily. Looking at the history, there's been some issues in the past as far as the new ordinances kind of makes it really very simple. If the select board provides an allocation, you can consider it, and if not, then you basically can't. And if someone brings it without it, then you just deny it. But
so to understand, if you're drilling the well that produces water, once people go online, then it brings in income. Correct.
Because
which will help the town.
Yep.
In general.
Well, I think that the wastewater thing is inevitable at some point, and some of the log jam has been this monumentous how are we going to pay for it, and you know, it's baby steps. It's how do we get some new, you're gonna pay for it through these high fees, which now exist. You know, they're more South Burlington-esque in their pricing in nature. But it's a chicken and egg, so, you know, somehow we've got to break that log jam and get some of that fee revenue coming in, and then it's a matter of seeing your way to the bond bank or whatever the path is to those wastewater improvements.
Now the Riggs Road extension, that, you believe that will happen?
So, you know, sort of jumping into this plan, this is a plan that was hatched with Annie and Alex when Annie was here. And it's one that's intended to incorporate some of the commercial up right on 116, the senior care building, which is the large L-shaped building in the center.
Move that out a little bit, Mitch, move it out so we can see a little context a little better.
Shrink it.
Sorry, shrink it.
So in other words, bring it out a little bit.
Yeah, 35, yeah. Sure.
Like something
there.
like that?
There you go.
Thank you.
Okay.
So moving from 116 back, in fact, Mitch, can I use that?
Sure. It's just a little bit, just try not to tilt it too much. It's the red button underneath.
Okay.
We can never have like a.
So, to develop some, you know, commercial components here, to have some higher density townhomes, potential mixed use here, mixed use here. Here you've got the as planned senior care component, and then we have a mix of medium and large homes here. So the goals that really everybody was looking for in a first phase is a natural extension of the settlement patterns here to the south, connectivity to the newly constructed ball fields, and you know, the at the same time keeping some of the community components. You know, here this is the well site, so the one change to this plan from the master plan is there were houses along here, and now it needs to be a community garden or some function that can be within so many feet of the well, and beginning to construct this centerline park as part of the project. So the overall layout of what you're looking at sits, we were very careful, this sits directly on top of the currently approved master plan. So we didn't, you know, we didn't redraw anything, we didn't really make any changes. I think this street has been aligned by a couple of feet because of the well location, but really everything is in the same place as it was 2 years ago now. So connectivity is one of the things. Originally this is, and eventually this will connect to Hinesburg Center Phase 2, which at the time that we put this initial plan together, I think Brett was in a different place, potentially moving forward. That I think that's certainly still an option. That's a private agreement that I would have to reach with him, wherein I would probably have to build that road, and then maybe someday if he builds, he'd pay me back. We are also looking at the Riggs Road option. We'll begin discussions in the coming weeks with both with RSG and with VTrans to understand where that discussion is. Our current thinking is this is the more ideal initial spot, but I also don't want to get trapped into some years-long debate between the town and the state and not knowing how they want to treat that intersection. There's a lot to take into account, but I would say that as I sit here tonight, this being unvetted, this would be a preferable configuration and leave this to later. And
if that didn't work out, you would go across this way?
Correct.
Okay.
That's actually designed to tie directly into Brett's master plan for phase two.
I've lost my scape. Is that coming behind Kinney?
Yes. Yep.
Right behind Kinney?
No. It's a ways west, further
It's a-
back.
it's a-
in his-
it's a little further back.
So you have to go back into phase two. And
Come
then
out by the first house that was built there, I think.
Yep. I'd have to look at the two plans together, but
I can't remember.
You know where you take the first right, you go up the hill a little bit?
then you have to turn left.
Yep.
And go, there was a big building there, you would like go through there and then.
It's a couple hundred feet west of the Kitty Drugs road
Right.
alignment.
Yeah, it's not Kylie, it's not a continuation of Kaylee's Way or whatever it is. That's why I think where it was at one point, but then it got pushed further back into phase two.
Because they
the
wanted
building
more
there that's
traffic
in
calming.
white, That's,
that's not currently envisioned as part of this phase. So all of these buildings that are shaded out,
yep.
these would be a later phase.
So that would just be green space or something for now?
Correct. Correct.
Well, you'd like to potentially do some, if,
Some of it depends on wastewater.
Yeah.
If this became the preferable and doable entrance, we would want to look at how much wastewater it is. It'd be great to build that building out. So, but, you know, some of it just depends on water. We have to be a little careful with commercial space and water because without knowing who your end user is, that affects.
But most commercial space uses less water than residential, right?
Yes.
Unless it's, I mean, even like breweries use like, yeah.
In theory, but there is there's a lot of activity in town surrounding breweries, surrounding hospitality, food service. I mean, those are the people that are going to look at this corner spot and really want it and want to be there. We've already been approached by some people, so that's one that we want to be careful of.
That's also one that the town has saved some water for like infill, right? They could maybe, because I mean,
But that would be infill, that would not be new development, right? That would be
Well, it's still a
additional.
new thing, so they would still require a water wastewater allocation, and I would think they would probably come from the numbers that they've provided to you.
Right, and what nobody wants is us to take a flyer and build a space that has limited water wastewater capacity, which then rules out what are likely the more popular users. So, but yeah, we're on the same page that if it's at all possible, adding this building to the mix would make a lot of sense.
I mean, I think you heard from us before that mixed use is really important, not just
Yep.
residential.
Yep, absolutely.
I heard you say potential mixed use. What's that mean?
This one is tagged as definitely mixed use, right here. This is all commercial right here. And this one, we haven't decided yet, but this one has the potential to be mixed use. So ground floor retail with apartments above.
The elderly
That is right here.
seniors.
Senior.
Where are you gonna get people from that?
So the phasing of this
Old board
phase,
members.
how do you feel you would go? With the residential, or do you think you'd kind of go right to the
I think
Housing?
that we would, there would be a bit of a blitz. We would immediately seek a partner tenant for this building. This building, there's such a demand, it's simply a matter of, and we're in this business where we have senior care in New Hampshire, in Vermont, in New York. So we have a variety of partners, local and national. So this is just a matter of putting the deal together. And then on the residential, probably starting speculatively a variety, we would want to start all three. So we would choose, some component of attached housing. We would start some speculative medium-sized homes, and we would start some speculative large homes. So we would sort of attack it all at once. I would imagine that there would be a lot going on at the same time there. The senior care, and remember that the senior care and certainly this commercial component are their own sort of standalone projects. So we partner up, we build the building. That's not like these where you might build a few of them speculatively, but then you need the buyers to keep going. So based on Chittenden County housing demand, unless we have some sort of a massive interest rate spike or another recession, I really don't see the demand going anywhere. I don't see a problem selling these, and with the addition of the fields here and the connectivity to that, this is going to be an extremely attractive neighborhood, I think, and that's by Hinesburg standards and really by any town standards. The access and the connectivity to the bakery and all of your existing commercial assets, and then the addition of more. It's just going to be very attractive.
So the access road to the
Fields
will be
change.
gone?
No, so what we want to do in phase one, as opposed to building a giant road to nowhere as a second access point, we want to sit down with the fire chief and talk to him about reconfiguring the access road they built to come in right here, and maintaining that as a second point of egress, as an emergency point of egress. Otherwise, it's, a whole lot of waste.
Is that exactly where the road is now?
No, they
It's
built
exactly where it was before they shifted it to where it is.
Right.
Yeah,
It goes
it's right down the property
kind
line,
of
pretty
curves
close.
over here.
It curves over
Town
here.
comes down here like this and kind of comes
So
in.
like I told them, I mean, they're cutting right through the back properties,
But-
where you intended back properties.
But for now, if we were to reconfigure it and bring it in here,
The problem is the
No,
town
they
has
have
spent a lot of money
money,
putting
yeah.
that road in. And
They can spend a lot of money moving it too.
they can.
We just said maybe that.
So you're planning on having it so you would end up back on, you could go out to.
As a secondary access, but only emergency, you said. You don't want that as a road.
no, I don't necessarily think it should be a road. It's an emergency point of access. And I think it makes more sense than building, if you want to slide that down again, Mitch. It makes more sense than having an access point here and an access point here. I deal with enough fire chiefs to know that he'll say, well, most of the development's back here. So this is going to be a more logical place to have an emergency egress. And I would envision us needing to commit to year-round maintenance of that. So we would have to plow and maintain that.
Well, how would you keep people from just using it as an emergency?
You just use a fire gate.
Oh, okay.
And, more than likely what you'd do is you'd use a fire gate that the fire department would have access to, and you might, on weekends, rec department would have access to it, and they would be able to unlock it on Saturdays and Sundays, so that as you get 80 cars filing out of here, you could go two different directions out. And I'm just completely talking out of school right now, but
So
that's
it's, okay.
some of.
It would be gated though.
It would be gated, yes.
So again, your primary access, you're
Would be
wishing to be right there.
or right there.
So how many units is this, right?
Let's see. I sent it along. I have to look at it. This is 21 single-family residences, 16 units of attached housing, townhomes, 50 plus or minus units of senior, 2 to 3 buildings of mixed-use commercial, and 15 plus apartment units, depending on how we configure those mixed-use buildings.
I'll say it's just some general feedback. I would wish that you would save some water allocation from the residential and have it up front for commercial, even if it doesn't necessarily go right away, to kind of save it, especially if we're gonna end up with wastewater issues. Because I think if the residential gets built out and we run out of wastewater, it'll be harder to add that commercial back in. From me, feedback.
So I know looking at the original plan, one concern I had was the uncertainty of Riggs Road, the uncertainty of the whatever, to Hinesburg 2. I was concerned that you really only had the one exit
Yeah.
out the thing, and I felt especially with the whole build out, that boy, from a safety perspective, you should really have at least two access points. And I would wonder with the senior housing whether or not so if you only have the one and there's an accident there, and there's an emergency at the senior housing and they need to get out, then they're not going out that way because it's gated.
Well, they could open it,
Emergency vehicles, having a gated access for emergency vehicles is not uncommon. That's how a lot of,
So how's that work? They don't all have keys to the padlock.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
the
do.
lockbox, yeah.
So there's a
So
lot.
every emergency ambulance in all of Chittenden County has a key to that.
So
Like on the
when,
interstates, the dividing gates.
and when you, for instance, when you build a new building, so we just built a new building in South Burlington, there's a lockbox on the outside of the building that police, fire, and they carry some sort of a magic universal, the lockboxes all work the same. So that's
Okay.
relatively standard stuff. I don't see that being a major obstacle. The bigger obstacle is solving. Really, the bigger obstacle is solving this. How do we? I'm not worried about talking to Brian Bouzier. I'm worried about, how does that all work? And it's really more of a VTrans discussion than a Hinesburg discussion. So.
Because there's not a huge amount of sight distance going up that hill, is there?
Again, it's not, your speeds are as such there. I mean, this is where it's always envisioned. It's
By the town.
Well, the high point, ironically, the high point, if you want to slide it down for me, Mitch, the high point is right here, but if you all remember, it was decided in one of these rooms that isn't where the connection should be. It should be at Riggs Road.
Yeah.
So, so that's where it is.
So you can change speed limits for sight distance, to make sight distances if they don't.
So it's already 40, right? Or
30.
is it 30 now?
I think it's necking down to, you're on the,
It's
I was
40.
thinking it's 40 right
It's
there.
it's 40 still,
Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't think it was 30.
it's 30 right here.
But yeah, just move the
But
sign.
still,
Yeah.
it's a pretty long, it's not like a steep downhill grade or anything, so,
No.
and you're moving slow. I mean,
I mean, it works for Riggs Road, certainly, I think.
Well, I think the vision is eventually there'll be a build out across the street.
Yeah.
So it's a sensible place to put the intersection.
Yep.
And then you would develop along, I mean, obvious, it's not darkened, but I'm hoping that there would be sidewalks along the 116. I mean, I
Right.
know it's not.
It's my understanding that Hinesburg Center is obligated to bring it across the brook, and then we would be obligated to connect it to right here.
or at least, I mean, if you're gonna put a commercial business in there.
I wish that
certainly
this showed Creekside or Kinney. Like, it's hard for me.
I think that's
to-
just a suggestion that's fruitful. Is probably most of these people are familiar with the configuration of the site, and you've probably got this drawing, Ben. But
Oh yeah, Mike
to
has
show
done
it
both
in
of them.
context with the neighborhood to the south, all the way up,
Yeah.
Shelburne Road is
Yeah.
really helpful.
Shelburne Road.
So you really see those points of connection.
Because I can't,
Shelburne
so
Falls Road.
when you say
What did I
Hinesburg
say?
LLC,
The curtain drain.
I mean, when Hinesburg Center, that's Brett's development.
Correct.
Yeah.
So in lieu of the fact that some of these developments may not happen, there might be more pressure for you to provide connectivity to the south.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, this is, as discussed at length over the 2 years that this churned through the process, phasing, and more phasing. So this is essentially just a first phase. And, I think that as we contract with our traffic engineers to evaluate what we're doing here, we're going to look at the whole picture, not just this picture. So I think that's important to understand it's important to understand how this is going to work, but it's also important to understand how what we're doing now ties into the bigger picture.
Right, it's
So-
just, we wanna make sure that every phase can basically stand alone if that's
Yep.
where it
I
ends.
wanna make sure this one can stand alone.
Right,
It can never
right.
be built.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So if you scroll to the left,
Oh, thank
looking
you.
at the park area, so, I mean, I think like,
That looks
the park
different
has
though, is that what
changed,
is,
right?
yeah, is that actually
Or not-
what
not
it
the park,
happened?
the,
But baseball fields,
our park.
yeah,
And
No,
like, I thought they moved around the playground and.
they did, I don't remember if that's where
So I
it
was
ended
just
up or
wondering,
not.
The driveway comes in from the other
The
side.
driveway comes in from the other
Comes in
side.
From here like this.
They had to shift the baseball field a little bit, but I thought one of the big things was they moved the playground. So is that where?
Yeah, I think that's where they moved.
And I think that there might have changed where the stormwater goes, wasn't it?
Actually, it was a shift in this area here, but it would still get into the pond that would be.
So that's your stormwater pond,
Yeah.
though, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that might,
Well, for clarity's sake, anything they did, it is my understanding that once we create this connection, that all of this reverts back. So, we had made a suggestion that what we really should do is bring their entry road in over our existing, what will be the right-of-ways. And it was decided for a variety of reasons that that's not the way that was going to happen. So, it's not a bother to us. Once we tie this in, though, then this is now their access, and all of this sort of goes away. So we want to repurpose it as a second point of egress. But I am assuming that this build out is contained within their building envelope. If they did stuff outside the building envelope, then it's not an issue today, but someday when we go to build these houses, it could be.
Right, so the lot line for that.
The lot line is actually right here.
Yeah, and then is it jogged to the right there a little bit and then.
Yep.
And then wraps around to the.
And it is important, just so everybody understands the eventual build out, or the build out of this and the containment of the site wasn't the doing of us or of the Bissonnettes, but it was actually of the recreation fields. They're at 9.98 acres. So they actually crimped this a little bit to stay under 10 to keep this from being subject to any sort of state oversight. So I think there was some criticism of us at one point that somebody, not from the board, but from the public, they felt that we were somehow squeezing the rec fields, and that's definitely wasn't the case. They wanted to stay with a local permitting process. So.
And that playground was their playground, right? Not your.
Correct.
Not a play, because, okay.
Correct. And we really have, in our plan, we had public components of green space, a centralized green that sort of ran from this property line back. And then we had some smaller garden space here, which has actually been has been expanded quite a bit. So when you look at I don't have the exact number, I would need to have Mike Busher look at it, but I think we're probably roughly 50% of our committed green space would be built out with this first phase.
And is that a little pond down below the? Sorry, down below that guy.
I don't know what that is, to be honest.
I can
hedgerow, I think, or hedge or something.
I don't know what it is. Maybe berry bushes. Mike puts all this good stuff in here.
I thought it'd be a
Then
nice place for a little
landscape.
reflecting pond, but.
Oh, some ducks.
I'm gonna guess probably not
it
due to
looks like
its
trees.
proximity to the brook. Yeah, I think that's just hedges of some sort, vegetation.
Alright. So I was gonna say, while I think a pond might be nice, you'd have to fence it in or something, then which would destroy whatever niceness you got out of it.
Do you foresee an issue with that many houses all coming out onto one and not having more?
I leave that to the traffic engineers. They're going to. It's honestly not the houses. I can tell you that I'm building one out in Williston right now, which is 40 houses. This is about 40 houses, and it doesn't move the needle at all. And actually the trip ends generated by, you might be able to help me with this, the trip ends generated by senior care are like 25 or 20% of standard suburban housing. So really your trip ends you know, this commercial, again, this is where we are including it. This is where the rub will come on so much of it. So understanding what those uses might be, that's really where the trip generation is going to come from. Do you have any thoughts on that?
You're correct in the way you stated. I work for RSG. We are likely to be retained. So anyway, you'll see me maybe in a different capacity on this project. But yeah, as Ben said, the trips are, I think, spot on. That you're probably at that threshold of probably that 75 vehicle per hour, which is interesting to VTrans. But obviously, we're looking at a bigger picture and how it's phased in and interacts with everything else. But
is C commercial?
Where's C? C is mixed use.
Mixed use.
So that is ground floor commercial with apartments
Because that was the other thing we had a lot of conversation about is trying to not, you know, trying to move the commercial back away from 116 and actually maybe have some parallel streets within.
Well, and again, it's we have to choose. So this is a phase. So we have to choose.
Right.
Where do we? I had great battles with Mitch's predecessor over this corner lot. So this corner lot being a dedicated commercial, quote, light industrial, was a huge sticking point, which is why we have made sure that this remains in that first phase.
And a huge part, I'm trying to remember back to all the conversation, but I do remember we wanted to think about bringing some commercial off 116 and having some like parallel roads. So I think
yeah, and we have that. This road here is envisioned of that. So you have
right. It's just sad that none of that's gonna get built right now.
Well, again, it's from an infrastructure standpoint. We don't want dead ends all over the place. So it's and in particular, it's one thing to have and jump in any time. It's one thing to have a dead end with an emergency access at the end that has a few houses on it, and actually there is some traffic circulation here.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So you really only have 3 houses on a quote dead end, as opposed to building a massive mixed-use building here, which is going to generate a lot more traffic also on a dead end. So that's sort of, you know, we had to pick.
But I just that was a really big consideration before, was trying to bring some of that mixed-use commercial off from 116 and try to develop another, because this is pretty much building out essentially the rest of the town.
If we could, once we get the wastewater, I'll be right back in here.
What kind of space are you thinking from the 116 to the building lots for sidewalks, lawn space, you know, so you're not walking right on 116?
Oh, I can't tell from this image, but this is set back quite a bit. I don't know what the scale is.
I was looking for a ruler, but I don't see one on there.
No, there's that setback along 116 that's actually marked there fairly well on that drawing. It looked like.
I think we're set back further than the bakery and what have you.
Yeah, it was almost too much at times that we felt like it wasn't close enough, that it wasn't going to be traffic calming enough.
And those are the things that I think we'll vet out in preliminary plat. We have a vision.
You know what I mean? You want it to be right up so it feels like you're entering a town, not that it's like set far into an island
Unless you're
away.
walking on the sidewalk, you don't want to be walking next to the road.
Right, that's true.
I think we did pull this away, and we did it. We've drawn it here as more of a an impervious path, almost like you'd have a bike path,
Yeah.
as opposed to a sidewalk that's up against the road.
Yep.
And it would have multiple connectivity points into the project. So you got one here, and then you would have one further up.
I assume you have a lot less V-Trans headaches if it's not right up against the road.
Mm-hmm. And the other piece we'll begin the discussion on, in particular if we do pursue a Riggs Road intersection, is we'll talk to CCTA and how do they want to deal with that, because I know years ago when I talked to CCTA, they were very bullish on the idea of having bus stops here on either side of the road and potentially shelters. So that's, again, a discussion that will come up, and you know, there will be some things that get phased in now and some that get phased in later when it comes to these details.
Big
There's
building
the
there would be the
sidewalk on the
Hinesburg bus
east
station.
side that's going in, Mitch? That
Is
sidewalk?
there a sidewalk
Yes, there's gonna be a
And
sidewalk.
they're putting in.
that goes from Riggs Road?
Yep.
Yeah, it's gonna be from the Jiffy.
Global station.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually from Commerce Street up to.
And wasn't there a consideration of a GMT stop as part of that project, right?
I don't
there
know.
was something.
I don't know. Could be.
I don't remember that.
I think there's some overall challenges with looking at these, and I understand the issues with water and sewer, looking at phase projects. You know, here we've got a building that's not going in as part of this phase for economic reasons and sewer and water reasons, and I just think in general that we need to be careful in looking at these projects of, well, what does happen if phase one is the end of this project for whatever reasons.
But and where I do understand that challenge, I can produce memo after memo after memo after meeting statement after meeting statement. I mean, the word phasing must have been used 1,000 times.
And just the point being that the phase should stand on its own if it had to.
Correct.
Yep.
And I think that's the goal here. That's what we're working towards.
And at the same time also work with the larger development, the build out, which is.
And some of the ways we might treat that, if you want to zoom out a little bit, Mitch, is and this would be good to get board feedback on, is if we came in and I don't know the procedure in Hinesburg for this, but if we came in we said, okay, we've got allocation for everything that's shown in dark gray, but we would like to, from a site plan concept, include this building and these two buildings once water wastewater becomes available, and we'll just come back for what in Essex would be called site plan approval with a building elevation. I don't know if there's a component for that here.
It's the way the water wastewater ordinance is set up. You're getting approval based upon
what I've got water and wastewater.
Right, and the thing here is that this isn't a site plan. This is a subdivision application. So if it was something that, I mean, you could amend it possibly, but you'd still have to come in for a, that's one possibility if it happens to be something that is relatively small.
What I've done on other projects is I've come in as part of the subdivision, and I actually, will shadow out 2 or 3 buildings and say, okay, well, when the time comes, we'll come back in for site plan review on those buildings. So again, we can talk with staff about how that might work, or if it can work.
Yeah, you'd have to go, it's a discussion, but you'd have to basically go, being that this would be separate from the subdivision applications, because with this, you do the subdivision applications to get these different pieces, and then come back for the site plans for
the individual.
Right, so, it's an interesting question if you were to add a building, or we'd have to probably get back to you on that, whether that could be a subdivision amendment, or if that would have to then trick into the next phase of going through a subdivision process. But we can get back, I'll get back to you on that.
Yep.
Would it make sense to submit this for review to the village steering committee to get their feedback?
I don't know. Let me get back. One thing, I'm just curious whether this has already gone through some of those type of reviews and some type of.
I mean, it would be, I would, where this is a phase, you know, I would maintain that this is all part of the plan that was reviewed. We haven't changed, I mean, it's a piece of it, but all of these things have been, you know, fairly well vetted, and.
Certainly we should ask for feedback.
I mean, they're just an advisory board
Right.
that spends a lot of more, you know, this is what they talk about and what they do, as opposed to, that's not our.
You're gonna either hear from Warren or hear during our meeting.
I'm just thinking it might give you a little bit more heads up, and so you can spend more time on the front end versus the back end for feedback, if you're looking for feedback.
I could contact them and go forward with that.
So Mitch, it's getting late. Do you have, I mean, do we wanna, I'd like to leave and look at this even some more, actually, cause it's.
My only other question, well, two things. First of all, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole with this, because where this is a concept and it's pretty similar to what we're going to bring in, this hasn't been engineered yet, so there are things that will change, so I want to be careful we don't get too attached. And then the other reason we're here in specifically, you know, upon Alex's request, is so that that we're on the same page with the board that we're going to come in with a preliminary plat application for this, and there won't be some request to go back to sketch plan or anything like that, because that did happen with another project. So we would obviously be opposed to that. We don't think it should go back to sketch plan, even as we discuss all of the things we've discussed tonight. It's clear that you folks want the ability to look at the larger footprint, the larger impact, how's this all going to work, traffic, so on and so forth. And strictly technically speaking, if this were to go back and go through sketch plan for just this, then I wouldn't be obligated to talk about any of those other things. So
What is staff directing as far as that decision?
Well, I mean, we're fine with this going to preliminary. I kind of addressed it on the third paragraph of the background part of the report that I threw together. There are some differences between the other development, which had some issues, and this particular one. The only thing is that the way in Hinesburg it's worked out is that subdivisions have a sketch, a preliminary, a final, and it's not always, and maybe it's just simply just the phenomenon of the circumstance where you had this sketch going to preliminary, final, and well, how do you do that next stage? So shouldn't that be also then a sketch on the next phase, preliminary, final?
Well, and you know, my argument would be that phasing, how do you treat phasing? So,
and that's kind of the area on that, because you know, in essence, that has basically been, and I don't think that I'll just say the board will make up its mind on that. But as far as what we've discussed in the planning and zoning department, this could be you have your sketch and it comes down to your preliminary, final on this, and the concerns, of course, of having, because you know, the phasing is one thing usually, but a phased development gets an approval, preliminary, final approval. It's just going to be built out over a period of time. Where here, what this kind of happens to be is you've got this development which, and again, unfortunately, who knows, it might actually all change with the water and everything that, and this magical change that happens with the sewers. So all of a sudden, you can go all the way through with everything. But in essence, right now, it looks like this is going to be a development. You're going to be building this development, and then the infrastructure and everything will allow for a future development. And just looking at the process on that, it may have to, in essence, be where, and again, this could be really streamlined in how it's done. Here's that next step, and looking at that, and it might just have to go through that step of sketch, preliminary, final.
I kind of see it more, I feel like this is more of like a master plan and then a project within a master plan, as opposed to the plat of the initial sketch.
Yeah.
But I'm not.
Where are we with sketch plan? Because if this history is right, we
Yeah.
denied one.
They actually denied two.
We denied two, but
and then it went to environmental
appeal,
court,
yeah.
and what happened?
And environmental court
Yeah.
overturned the denial.
Right.
So we basically have an approved sketch plan is the way
Yes.
that works?
Correct.
That you have been then just continuing.
Sure, but I feel like, and I mean, this is one person speaking. I feel like there's enough of a change that you had to do in order to make this phase stand out alone, that it kind of isn't the same
But
as
actually,
the
I
original.
haven't changed anything. This is exactly, if
Okay.
you look at the image that is approved through the environmental court, the only change is there's
Missing
5
those
less
houses.
houses.
Okay.
But now it's a standalone project, that was the sketch, the entire.
But it's not, it's a phase.
And that, and
It's,
I
I understand the
I
chicken
know.
and the
Yeah.
egg.
But you don't have, there's no water, or it is just this, it currently now, because of the situation with water and sewer, it is only the project, this is the only project.
And I completely understand and appreciate the irony of this, but this is, we brought forth a master plan because that is what we needed to bring forth. And so now we have a master plan. And again, this isn't uncommon. I'm doing
So the only thing you've moved from the original approved by the environmental court after is you're missing houses.
Correct, and I think this road's been realigned by a couple of degrees to make the angle work. But if you, and these houses are actually, again, these shadows are the originally approved. And I am just, I'll be quite honest and say it on the record. It cost me $250,000 and several years and an environmental court decision to get the sketch plan. I'm not.
Yeah, no, I get it.
I'm not encouraged to walk away from that sketch approval and get into that trick bag again. And to be.
If that is the only thing that is changed of the original.
Not only that, but to be honest, so much of the back and forth in the original process had to do with chicken and egg items. So we'll go back to sketch plan, and then everybody's going to want to talk about access and roads and this, that, and the other. And I'm not obligated to prove any of that out at sketch plan. So I can see where this becomes that cycle again. And again, part of the reason I'm here having this conversation, I'm assuming that the board would like to begin to get into the nitty-gritty. And it's not that the board can't deny the project or have the project change. They all change at preliminary. But I'm sort of advocating, let's get into a process where we're retaining RSG, we're getting answers for you, we're looking at any potential wetlands, and so when we're in here having these discussions, we're having substantive discussions based on hard data, and then the board isn't trying to weigh what we're saying might or might not be with 20 angry neighbors.
What you're hearing a little bit is my frustration probably with the select board and in that they're dealing with the allocation and asking us to approve a project that may never happen. So that is part of, I think, a mismatch in this process, that we're asked to approve we're not supposed to approve a plan that there isn't enough water and sewer for, but yet that's what happened with the environmental court upholding this sketch plan. So that's the hard part for us to wrap our head around with our constraints.
I mean, I think that's why we're guided, I guess, to request a master plan, was so that it's not like just this thing in a field with no thought as about how the rest of it would go. So.
But this is more than just a master plan. It's an approved sketch plan. There's two separate things.
The whole thing is the master plan.
Correct.
But the whole thing is an approved sketch plan.
That's a very good point.
There's two separate things. A master
Yeah.
plan is like, oh, this is what's going to happen someday, maybe, but we're not approving it. We approved that, or with the help of the environmental court, we approved that.
I'll get back to you on then. Yeah, it's an interesting, you bring up a very interesting point on
But
that.
there's other concerns why we denied the sketch plan.
But we
Was
weren't-
mixed use.
But it didn't matter. The way that we worded it,
Well, it does matter, because you need to decide if there's enough mixed use in this, and will
Actually,
there
the way
be-
the decision
Yeah.
came down was, it came down to a single point, which was, can you deny it based on based on having available water, wastewater? And the answer was no, you can't deny it for that reason. And that's the,
Because we didn't word it, we worded it, we denied it based on wastewater. We didn't deny it based on mixed use and wastewater because we got confused and thought that like that trumped everything. So then we didn't list our other concerns because it was just the way we did it. So it was the way that it got upheld at the environmental court.
So another thing, I mean, the whole legal process that kind of confuses me. So we wrote a denial, and okay, so it was denied for reasons that weren't upholdable. But because it was a denial, you don't bother writing conditions. Had it been an approval, you don't bother writing all the usual conditions and orders that you would put in a sketch plan. So none of those exist. But now the sketch plan has been approved, but we never got the chance to actually
Condition it. That was our
so
fault.
do we have to start writing denials with conditions?
Yes.
So that, should it be overruled, these are all the things that we want to, because normally it's just like we have always said, it's a denial, it's a one-sentence denial, and you don't have to say anything more.
There's more that you can do, but that will be for another discussion another time.
Okay.
The only thing is, it is 10 o'clock, so I don't,
So all those issues that were brought up that weren't part of the denial that was overturned by the environmental court still exist and need to be addressed at preliminary if we go to preliminary. That's just,
I think, and that's why we're here talking through this.
So this is my next question. All those issues were with the rest of the plan too. So do those get all addressed at preliminary plat? Because how can we separate out those issues from this project from the rest of the project? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like I feel like if we go to preliminary plat, we need to go to preliminary plat with the entire thing. And then we worry about phasing.
You can't because we can't consider preliminary plat if somebody doesn't have sewer and water.
But we can because the court said we could. But the court said that you can't deny it based on insufficient water capacity for the project.
That's for sketch plan, not necessarily for preliminary. And under the ordinance, the water and wastewater ordinance, if an application comes to you that doesn't have sufficient water, wastewater, you're required to deny it. So under the ordinance, but that ordinance came after this particular year-old.
And again,
so it wasn't based on that.
And again, this board must have asked for phasing 100 times.
Oh,
and
no, we know.
and we said
we were here.
when we come in, there will be
Right.
a phase one will come in with
two things. One, to be fair to you, because I hope that you are able to build out more, and to be fair to a changing board that maybe Ted and I, maybe we all won't be here forever. That we need somewhere to have that documented that what our concerns were with the rest of the project, don't we, or not?
You have findings of fact, you have,
That's.
you also have conclusions, and.
But not conditions.
Well, it wouldn't be conditions. There was an interesting way, I've seen some other ones that actually deny it and basically say, you know, and put in some other types of verbiage that these are concerns that could possibly have some weight in terms of going from sketch to preliminary. But you've mentioned something very interesting, and I'm gonna look up something as far as to see legally what those next steps happen to be.
Well, and I think we just wanna all be on the, when I'm hearing from the board, and for our purposes, we all wanna be on solid ground, so that we don't have to, when we bring forward a preliminary application, if that's what we do, then we don't have to waste 2 meetings talking about should we be reviewing a preliminary application that we've established yes or no, and we can get on about the business of discussing the project, which includes the points you're bringing up.
I think it's gonna take a little bit of time with staff for you guys to figure all that out, right?
There's a couple of things we need to figure out, but no, I don't think it's going to delay your situation.
No, I think it's going to take us, we've got to deal with the water, we're going to be
Oh, no, I'm not talking
planning.
about that. I'm just talking about like how we're gonna figure out that.
Yeah, so I guess the answer is thank you for bringing this up, because we do, that is a very good thing to come to agreement on as to where that is going, and
We want to be on the same page procedurally.
and how we address the concerns that were brought up that were short-circuited by the environmental court. That's kind of where we're coming from, although we would have had a much more detailed.
A more robust.
Right.
Had it been an approval, there would have been several things.
This has to change, this has to change,
Or
this
it might
has to
have been
change.
denied on a different point. I
Or
can't
denied
remember.
on several different
Yeah,
points.
that's our problem.
And learn. So.
So to Sarah's point, I am part of that changing board, and so looking at this small part of a larger project that was approved it's exactly the problem that Sarah brought up.
And yet it's the process that's in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we owe ourselves coming up to a conclusion on that, and owe it to you to tell you how that is, where we're parked in terms of concerns and how to address them on something that's been approved, but things that were open hadn't really been addressed.
Well, and there's validity in having the conversation, because you've got, I don't know if they've continued their sketch plan approval across the street, but I mean, they've got 100+ units. This is going to come into play with the NRG project. I mean, I can't imagine they're going to build out that entire thing all at once, so.
Nope.
They've already come back for a phasing.
Have they?
Yeah,
They came
we
back
approved
for
that corner commercial.
Oh, well, yeah, that
Like
one little chunk right there, right?
Change of the lots
Well, that
little
is a
bit.
phasing.
Oh, yeah, I
so-
suppose, yeah, it's all part of the thing. Okay.
So. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very
Thank
much.
you.
I think this was productive.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Nice to meet you. Have a good night, everybody.
Hey, see ya.
Thanks.
Well, actually, I'll tell you what, I'll just quickly say two different things, and I guess the question is, do you want to do your deliberation on Willett Campbell now?
Oh, yeah, I think we can. I don't think that's too long.
Or actually, Dennis, let me leave it to you. Do you want me to say the two quick things and then go into deliberation?
Other business? There's other business?
All right, I'm just gonna ask the question as far as, first off, on your iPads, bringing on the 2018 folder. Did anybody have any?
I'm not sure I did it right, but see, I think I'll only know next meeting if it syncs.
Well,
If it shows a
I
little
send
green
it
syncing button next
several
to it,
different ways.
No, I didn't get
It's
that
on
sync button.
It'll be on the Dropbox. I'll continue
Yeah,
sending
yeah,
links.
that's fine. I'll figure it out.
But anybody need any help on that? Okay.
I honestly didn't have time. I've been still on Dropbox.
I don't have the
haven't
green
had time
thing.
Okay.
It's not as complicated.
I just haven't had time.
I'll put it this way. Alex even showed
I
me.
think I
can do
messed it up.
now.
I think I officially messed
With
it up, but not with that.
And the second one, you
'Cause I'm
probably
only
have heard,
thinking
just an
too.
FYI, we did get a Hannaford's application, and we're tentatively scheduling that for April 3rd. I've only done a very, very quick look at it at this point. I think the more complicated thing about it is that it's a thing that actually has a history, but other than that, it's really just simply a typical site plan review on some steroids, I guess you could say. So I imagine if there is something that needs to be conversed with the applicant, I'll have time the next few weeks to do that, and unless something changes, that April 3rd date is the day.
It's a site plan revision, right?
It's coming in as as I understand it, and again, we're also still waiting on the lawyers to kind of agree on how this is to be reviewed. But basically, it may be that it's just a completely brand new site plan review, because the site plan approval was voided by the courts. And they also have to come back for a subdivision amendment of the Commerce Park subdivision in changing a building envelope. So that's well, yeah. So that's
I guess that's building envelope.
Yeah, you can look at it either which way. So just letting you know, and you can put that on your calendars as far as April 3rd. That's the planned date on that, unless all of a sudden I find something that, you might want to fix this, and we decide to push it back. But other than that, I just want to keep you up to date on that. I think I did send you a Dropbox link before I actually knew that you could actually add that to your iPads the same way as the 2018 where I actually have it. But there is a link, and that link is also available to the public. And Alex has sent out a bunch of front porch forum posts on it as to where that happens to be. And that's all I wanted to mention. Oh, and also, next meeting we do have a couple of applications that would be available, as well as a bunch of extension requests. So that's what I've got.
I would move we go into deliberative session to discuss the Willett Campbell.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Was that the only one?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so that's.
Delivery